Apparently, Kirby Smart is doing this differently than a lot of other head coaches and a lot of other high-level college football programs are doing it, and that's NIL spending. Now, if you look at overall numbers and you see that, Georgia's NIL numbers are pretty similar to they're towards the top, right? They're up there with Oregon and Ohio State. So Georgia does spend a ton of money, but there's been a lot of talk about this. There was a recent report that came out talking about how an insider was saying Kirby Smart is one of the niftiest NIL spenders out there, and that when you have a brand like Georgia, you don't have to necessarily spend top dollar to get some players to come in. That was kind of the conversation that sprouted when Georgia brought in one of the top transfer portal targets in wide receiver Zachariah Branch out of USC. They brought in another guy in Noah Thomas. They brought Zachariah Branch's brother in. They brought Dylan Bell's little brother in. They brought some guys in. Now, they didn't go out and get a ton of people in the transfer portal, just a handful of players at positions of needs because, well, what does Kirby Smart think? This is what he thinks. We pride ourselves on retention and stability. The foundation of this program is built through high school programs and bringing good kids into the program that can become good football players. Kirby Smart said that on Tuesday in the opening spring practice press conference. Spring practice has been underway this week, and the Dogs are back in action on the football field and in pads, and it's a new-look Georgia team. And it's a new era of college football. That's a conversation I'm going to talk about a little bit more in an upcoming video about just the change of the climate, specifically in the conference. But it is different. It's harder to win. The money has changed things, and it has changed the relationship between players and coaches. It has changed jobs. There are GM jobs now, right? If you're not familiar with that, general managers, the guys that create the roster, that kind of have control over the spending of a football program. That's something you see at the professional level at the NFL. Well, now those jobs are sprouting in universities. And Kirby talked about that too, and how he's not quite ready to give up that total power yet to somebody else and trust someone else to do it. But Georgia is a little bit different when it comes to this. I think that Alabama probably would be, and probably still is in this category when it comes to brand name, but especially with Nick Saban, where it's like, hey, I'll give you a hypothetical. X team, X university is offering me $1 million to come play for 3 or 4 years at this place, but Georgia's offering me $500,000. Alabama's offering me $600,000, but I'm just throwing out a smaller school name, West Virginia. First one that popped in my head. But West Virginia's offering me $1 million. Well, there's a draw to go to programs where they have big-time head coaches and big-time names. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post talking about NIL and Kirby, and is he really a thrifty spender? Well, there's a couple of things that are interesting to me, and I want to talk about. I'm looking at On3 NIL valuations. They do this list where it's either how much the player is making or how much this person is valued at in terms of NIL money. And they have an NIL valuation top 100. This is all collegiate athletes. There's gymnasts on here. There's basketball players, football players, baseball. A lot of sports are represented on this list, but certainly there are a ton of football players because where's the money at? The money is at football. I've gone through this list. I'm looking at it right now. I see Arch Manning, number 1, Texas quarterback. Cooper Flagg, the freshman phenom on Duke basketball. Carson Beck, number 3 at Miami. Georgia was not going to give that type of money to Carson Beck. I'm just going to put that out there right now, and I've got more evidence for that. Jeremiah Smith, Livy Dunn. If you're not familiar with some of these names, AJ DeBansta, he's still in high school. He's going to be an NBA player one day. If you haven't heard about AJ DeBansta yet, I'm glad I'm the one that put you on with him. Go look at his highlights. Lagway, Lenore Sellers, Nussmeier. There's all sorts of football players on this list, but I scroll through. Not a single Georgia football player on the top 100 list. Not a single one. So Georgia is not giving out big dollar amounts to these guys. They didn't do that for Zachariah Branch, or I think we'd see his name on this list. They didn't do that for Noah Thomas. They don't have to do that for Nate Frazier, their up-and-coming star. Why? He loves Georgia and he wants to be there. They don't have to do that for Gunnar Stockton. because he just wants to be at Georgia, and I don't think Gunnar Stockton cares about that all that much. They would have maybe had to do it for Carson Beck. But Georgia isn't spending high dollar amounts on these players. Yes, they're distributing a lot of money. They're paying for a lot of guys, and I think that's where you're seeing that level out. But you saw with Ohio State, they dished out a lot of money last year to create a roster that, hey, won them the national championship. Money well spent, right? So that's been one of my questions is, hey, Kirby, Georgia, you want to get back to winning back-to-back national championships. Do you need to dig into the pocketbook a little bit deeper? Kirby doesn't think so. Okay? And his players don't seem to care either. I just referenced a few of them. I don't think Gunnar Stockton cares about that. It doesn't seem like Ryan Puglisi cares about that. I had a conversation with him. I don't know how much some of these guys really care about that. So, I think about CJ Allen, starting middle linebacker for Georgia. We got to talk to him on Tuesday, along with a couple other players. We got to talk to him after Kirby Smart. Excuse me, I just saw something that flustered me a little bit, so I'm going to get through that. Anyway, CJ Allen talked about how he doesn't care about the money. This isn't about the money. What did he say? He said, I played football when I was 7 years old. It wasn't because of money back then. It's not because of that right now. It's essentially what he said. I don't have the exact quote. I will pull up the exact quote for you so you can see that. But CJ Allen is probably going to be a Butkus Award, a guy that at least is in the mix for that, right? When you're talking about someone that has a lot of reps at middle linebacker, these Georgia linebackers, look, Jalen Walker won it last year. You saw Nakobe Dean win it, Roquan Smith. CJ Allen's a guy that's going to have an opportunity to be named the best linebacker in college football. That's at least something that's attainable for him. So, he doesn't care about the money. KJ Bolden is an interesting story in this. Safety, he'll be one of the starting safeties for Georgia. He was essentially a starter and played at a couple different spots for Georgia in 2024 as a true freshman. KJ Bolden was about the money at one point in his recruitment, and that's part of why he was going to Florida State. Well, guess what? He changed his mind. He wanted to go to Georgia. Georgia, we learned in recent recruitments that Georgia is not going to hand out top dollar to some of these recruits. Dylan Raiola. There were different layers to what happened with Dylan Raiola. Okay, there were different layers to why he ended up choosing Nebraska. And one of it had to do a little bit with money. Georgia wasn't going to hand out a giant NIL package to Dylan Raiola because they don't view all these guys. I think it was probably against what Kirby believes in and against what Georgia is most likely going to do for the most part moving forward. And when they paid Carson Beck a couple $1 million to come back in 2024, I don't think that that's going to be the norm for the Georgia Bulldogs. This is a team that is trying to operate differently. And you go back to what Kirby said, talking about we pride ourselves on the high school retention. We pride ourselves on building through that way. Not a lot of guys are jumping on a helicopter and flying around the state and making relationships with pretty much every program you can think of, and programs that don't necessarily pump out players that are Georgia quality players. Why? Kirby Smart is trying to build a pipeline. He's trying to find the Lad McConkeys. He's trying to find the Jordan Davises. He's trying to find the Javon Bullards, the kids that are not huge recruits and that come from schools that maybe, in some cases they do, but come from schools that maybe don't necessarily put out elite level talent. He's trying to build it that way, and he's trying to do it the way that it was traditionally done. And that was when money was not on the forefront of some of these people's minds. But when I go through the list and I'm seeing some of these random basketball players, some of these Luke Altmaier, the Illinois quarterback, he's number 46 on this NIL list. There's not a single Georgia football player on this list. And there's plenty of Georgia football players that are much bigger names than Luke Altmaier. This is no disrespect to Luke Altmaier. He's just the victim of being the first name that I saw as a good example for this. But Georgia's doing this differently, and I think it's really interesting, and it's one of those conversations that we're going to continue to have over the next couple of years. There's a lot that's going to happen in 2025 for Georgia, but what they're not going to do is spend a ton of money. Thanks for watching.